Found a place to sit, and you all look very comfortable. We'll do all we can over the next hour or two to make you perhaps a little more uncomfortable. But unfortunately, that's the nature of today's program. I think without any further ado, I'd like to make sure that we all thank the Union Baptist Church, who has graciously allowed us to use their sanctuary again, and whose people have been more than generous in their time and their efforts. We greatly appreciate it on behalf of the entire audience here today, and all of those who planned. We want to thank you. Appreciate it. I think we ought to get started in this particular place in the proper way, and I will ask the Reverend Pastor Gary Hammonds from the Union Baptist Church to begin our program with an invocation.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. First of all, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Pastor McJunkins. He was unable to be here today. He's actually in Texas marrying his daughter. So he says his regrets, and he says, okay, but he sends his welcome to you. And if there's anything that we can do to make you feel more comfortable, there's people standing around the wall and some people out in the gathering area who can help you out, okay? Will you join me in a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you, dear Lord. In your love, you have made us, all nations of the world, to be one family, to love and respect one another. Yet our world is risen apart with prejudice, arrogance, and pride. Help the different races of your people to love and understand each other more. Increase our sympathy, tolerance, and goodwill that we may learn to appreciate the gifts that other races bring to us. Save us from the jealousies, hatred, and fear that result in what we will view today, and the tragic hate-filled events taking place in the communities around us. We ask for your guidance, Heavenly Father, for us to set an example of peace and harmony for all. It is in your holy and righteous name that we pray.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor. It is now my great pleasure to introduce a man with great expertise. He's also a very good old friend. Mike Jackson is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He led the architectural division of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency for more than 30 years. He's been involved with restorations of the Rosenwald Apartments in Chicago. He brings to the Rosenwald Initiative his knowledge, his passion, and he has coined the phrase, Julius Rosenwald should be Springfield's second most famous citizen. It's a dubious distinction, but it is yours. Mike Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Well, my granddaughter was over the other day. She's young and bouncy and cute, and she'd been to see a play. So she goes, let's do a play. That, of course, meant she'd be the star. My wife would be the audience, and myself. And she's a pro. She knows how to start the show. She looks up at us and says, ladies and gentlemen, please turn off your cell phones. This is a true story. Anyway, on behalf of the Rosenwald Initiative, I'd like to officially welcome you to this showing of Strange Fruit, a documentary film by Joe Katz that tells the story of the song's creator, Abel Merriman, the song's most noteworthy singer, Billie Holiday, and its impact on society for its voice of racial justice. My name is Mike Jackson. You've been introduced to me, and I'm part of the Rosenwald Initiative, which is an ad hoc committee in Springfield formed from various groups of organizations to basically improve the legacy or the recognition of the legacy of Julius Rosenwald. As you've heard, the second most important person to come from Springfield. But his story is largely unknown. 2 years ago, we showcased here a film about Rosenwald, and that documentary film has had national impact of basically raising the conversation and awareness of Rosenwald. But he started here in a house across the street from the Lincoln home. It is now, interestingly, the site superintendent's house for the Lincoln home site. But he rose from Springfield, goes on to New York, then moves on to Chicago, where he basically moves into the Sears Roebuck and Company as a half owner, and by the early 20th century, he's the president of Sears Roebuck, and he grew that to the great Sears Roebuck Amazon of its day. And at the age of 50, he turned his attention from making money to giving it away. And some have argued that he's America's first social philanthropist in what he did. And it's because of that philosophy of philanthropy that we're going to recognize him in this extended legacy of his own. And there's a couple of things about that legacy that are noteworthy. Give while you live was his philosophy. And basically, he didn't create an institution that would last forever. And he was kind of at odds with the whole culture of today in that he didn't put his name on things. So in this era of branding and naming rights, he's kind of got a whole modesty, which is part of why people don't know about him as much. Now, in particular, his gifts to America were numerous, but his advocacy for African-American education was truly nationally important. Starting with, as a board member of the Tuskegee Institute, he supported the construction of more than 5,000 elementary schools and supporting buildings across the rural South for African Americans. As a Jewish man, he also championed urban YMCAs for African Americans, and there's a couple of dozen of those across the country that were constructed. Then he established a foundation, and in his foundation he had a fellowship program for scholars and artists in educational advancement. Some of the noteworthy Rosenwald scholars include Langston Hughes, Catherine Dunham, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marian Anderson, who are all leading figures of the African American community. And he was also an early funder and supporter and active of the NAACP, which of course we know has origins to Springfield and the race riot of 1908. Now, our local organization is sort of ad hoc, but we're not alone in advancing this story. Last year, the National Parks Conservation Association created a research document promoting the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools Historic Park. Now, this research organization puts forward an idea. That idea is gaining traction. Senator Dick Durbin has introduced a study bill for the National Park Service to examine this idea. So what started out from our local committee got another national committee. They are now moving this up to the national organization is looking at the idea of the Julius Rosenwald legacy, and certainly the Lyman Rosenwald House, which is the names of the two owners in the 1860s, would be part of that distinction. So that's kind of a background on Julius Rosenwald, the legacy of what we're doing here as an organization in sponsoring this film. I'd also, though, like to thank our sponsors. Our initiative has got a lot of supporters in this. The Jewish Federation of Springfield, the Jewish Community Resource Council, Relations Council, the Springfield branch of the NAACP, the Springfield and Central Illinois African American History Museum, the Springfield Frontiers International Club, Union Baptist Church, the Velma L. Carey Family Fund of the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln, and the Lincoln Home National Site are all part of our sponsors. Today's feature will start in a few minutes. The film itself lasts about an hour, and after the film, we will jump in the Family Study Center where there will be a panel discussion on the social power of song. We have a couple of panelists that are going to participate in that. Some of you may have heard of Catherine Harris. I've seen her here already. Retired librarian of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum. Doesn't really say enough about her level of distinction. He's also going to be joined by Jonas Dematis, an associate professor of ethnomusicology, who's going to put the song in context. There'll be a musical performance by Tiffany Mathis. That's kind of the summary of where we come from, what we're doing
Southern trees bear strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
Strange Fruit is a song about a black man being hung, lynched. And it's very dramatic, especially the way Billie Holiday did it.
The song Strange Fruit caused such controversy when it was first heard that music publishers didn't want to touch it and radio stations refused to air it.
Music has always gone along with great movements. There are no great movements that do not have music. Even as early as this song was, it was helping to create the music for a movement.
Phonograph recording keeps advancing steadily as modern engineering skill brings to it the latest developments in sound reproduction.
It was the year 1939. Billie Holiday came into my shop one day. I had a record shop, Commodore Music Shop. She came into the store very unhappy that Columbia Records was hesitating and didn't really want to record Strange Fruit. Strange Fruit is a very special song, and you wouldn't look for it to be a big selling record. And a record company like Columbia Records wanted big sellers, and Billie recorded for them, and they didn't think Strange Fruit would be a commercial success. We set the date. I used the band that accompanied her at the Cafe Society where she was performing the song, and the rest was history. It's so striking and it's important, a song, that you set the mood for it. I had the pianist play like an interlude. In fact, I put it on the label, interlude by Sonny White. And Billie comes in and does her stuff.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
People thought that Billie Holiday was born in Baltimore, but she was actually born in Philadelphia. But she was raised in Baltimore. As a young teenager, she came up to Harlem. At that time, many people were moving to northern cities, and she was one of them. She started working in Harlem nightclubs, singing. When she first encountered Strange Fruit, she was in her very early 20s. At the time, Billie Holiday was kind of reluctant to sing it. Some people have said she was reluctant to sing it because she didn't know what it meant. And that's an argument that I find offensive. I think she was reluctant to sing it because it brought up the kinds of harsh images that she didn't want to necessarily put out there. It was very painful and very difficult. But she was absolutely convinced of the importance of recording the song. And she always said that from the very beginning. There's no evidence that Billie Holiday actually saw a lynching, but she would have grown up with a lore of lynching. It was utterly impossible for her as a black woman, particularly a black woman living in Harlem at that time, not to know about lynching. So she didn't really have to witness it firsthand to be very sensitive to that crime, that horrendous crime.
You hung somebody. You had no real evidence that they had done anything, but you hung them. You even brought a crowd in to enjoy this event. Then you would not only hang them by the neck, but you wanted to rip open their bodies and did so. You burned them to death, put a fire under them. Often you skinned their very faces. And this was met with applause. The crowd loved it. They were anxious to do it, all right? And men teaching their sons that this is what you do to them, right? This is, I don't know any kind of savagery that is worse than this.
Lynchings were done by common people who grew up believing that black people were not human, that they didn't deserve the same kind of rights and privileges as everyone else. And so taking their life made very little difference. And then they went and did their task, and then they went home and had fried chicken and scratched the puppy behind the ears and kissed the grandchildren and went to church.
How could you have Christianity? How could you have any form of religion except these people were Christian? How could they even ask God to forgive them for such acts that they perpetrated knowingly, planned?
We see lynching emerging on the national scene as a way of policing black communities as early as 1890s, right after Reconstruction, when there's a sense that black people are making too many political and economic gains. Lynching was often used as a means to contain and control a community that was overstepping its bounds politically and economically. But the reason given for lynching was that it was because of a rape of a white woman. Lynchings were often accompanied by the mutilation of the black body, the severing of the sex organs of the lynching victim. And that's something that Americans are fascinated by and ashamed of and quite afraid of, not just for its racial implications, but for the implications around sexuality. Those are the hidden scripts behind every lynching photograph or lynching story or lynching poem.
Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia sweet and fresh, and the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for a tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop.
When Billie Holiday first encounters Strange Fruit, she is performing at Cafe Society, New York's first truly integrated nightclub outside of Harlem. Located in Sheridan Square, in the heart of New York's Greenwich Village, the club is a novel social experiment. It is founded in 1938 by Barney Josephson, a former shoe salesman. Cafe Society parodies the affectations of so-called high society. Customers are greeted by doormen wearing rags, and playful murals adorn the walls. Yet it draws some of the most important entertainers of its era, and is visited by luminaries ranging from Paul Robeson to Eleanor Roosevelt.
What Cafe Society was a kind of merger in 1930s New York of European cabaret traditions, the traditions of Brecht and Weill that come out of Berlin and Vienna and Paris of the 1930s, and on the other hand, Afro-American jazz clubs of New York. In some ways, Strange Fruit was a kind of product of those two traditions coming together.
By the time Billie Holiday records Strange Fruit, it enters into the public discourse in both literature and painting about lynching.
Strange Fruit can be seen not as the only work about lynching, and I think that it brings together in a kind of powerful way what a number of other artists had been trying to do.
In 1935 and 36, the New York chapter of the NAACP organizes 2 shows of visual artwork addressing the subject of lynching. The artists are Black, white, and Asian, and their efforts are part of a long history of anti-lynching activity.
The anti-lynching movement had been going on for some time before the recording of Strange Fruit. There were anti-lynching campaigns throughout the United States. Strange Fruit became not just a song of protest, but a kind of elegiac song, a song of mourning. And it was a song that also sparked a kind of activism for Black communities.
There had been legislation introduced into Congress on many occasions to make lynching a federal offense. And each and every time it was filibustered or ruled over by Southern legislators.
During a 1940 effort to promote passage of a federal anti-lynching bill, the lyrics of Strange Fruit are sent to every member of Congress. Neither this tactic nor years of intensive lobbying by the NAACP ever succeeds. Federal anti-lynching legislation is never written into law.
Strange Fruit became a song that's been claimed by African Americans as part of an artistic tradition that's both beautiful, yet one born in protest. That was probably Billie Holiday's greatest contribution. She didn't write the song, but she certainly was a great communicator of that message.
I don't remember exactly when I heard Strange Fruit, but it caused a sensation in the neighborhood because they were lynching people in the South, and she dared to sing about it.
This song became Billie's in the sense that she had to go. She had to sing in places that she couldn't go in the front door. She could play at clubs that she couldn't sit at the table. Her mother or nobody could come, and sit there and watch her. She had to go to back doors, She couldn't live in the hotels with the white musicians. So I think she understood something about racism.
I think the song itself is a great song, and I think it is as great as it is because Billie has taken that material and being deeply familiar with the whole social context, the history, and the living confirmation of that. She puts it on, a whole other level.
Got to be Billie Holiday's piece, Strange Fruit. Nobody never thought to think about the lyricist or the composer. Initially, I tell you the truth, I thought a Black person had written it. And it was my curiosity about Billie Holiday singing this song and where did these lyrics come from and this haunting music. And I wanted to find out who was this person, was he Black or white? And amazingly, I found out not only was he white, he was Jewish American.
It is a Jewish schoolteacher from the Bronx who writes Strange Fruit. His name is Abel Meeropol, but he uses the pseudonym of Lewis Allen for his writing. Born in 1903 as the son of Russian immigrants, Meeropol grows up in the Bronx and graduates from DeWitt Clinton High School in 1921. He goes on to study at the City College of New York, earns a master's degree from Harvard in 1926, and returns to DeWitt Clinton as an English teacher the following year.
I first met Abel Meeropol when I got my first teaching appointment. I had joined the Teachers Union, and the Teachers Union people in the school were really the greatest. They were the brightest and the most active people. And so it was really a great time.
Don't marry a teacher unless he can feature
a button from Local 5.
At loving he's able, he's better than Gable, and
boy, he's got plenty of jive.
This was a rather well-known song that Abel did.
He wrote words, he wrote music, he, just all around. And he was a real fun guy to be with. He was just delightful. We were not unaware of what was going on in the South, even though we lived in the Bronx.
We were very much
we were
aware.
Very aware.
Very much aware.
And the Teachers Union was very aware.
The 1930s is a period of great cultural ferment and upheaval. This was a period in which the Communist Party was achieving a great deal of significance because it's a combination of economic depression, the rise of fascism, the Spanish Civil War. All of these together provide a very fertile opportunity for the Communist Party to spread its message. There were a significant number of communists among the Teachers Union, but by no means was it a communist organization. The fight against fascism was a focal point, and I think brought many people into activity in the progressive movement at that time that had not been before. All of this has not only a political context, but a cultural and entertainment context as well. There was, for example, an institution known as TAC, Cabaret TAC, the Theater Arts Committee, and this brought the outstanding talents of the theatrical community together, and Abel played a very important role in those activities.
So when it came to something like Strange Fruit that is so deeply felt, this is what came out of him.
Abel wrote Strange Fruit as a poem. It was originally published in the Teachers Union publication and later became the song.
It was sometime in the late 30s.
That's right. We heard Strange...
Or the middle 30s even, when I...
No, it wasn't
because
the
I
middle.
I'm sorry.
It was written in the late 30s.
Yeah, it was written...
So it was... Whenever those first performances were in... at the Teachers Union meeting.
At the Teachers Union meeting.
This was the kind of thing that when you heard, you couldn't applaud at first. It was just so gripping.
I consider Abel as a pioneer. The fact that he could write the song that really became the anthem on lynching, and that it should come from the pen of a Jewish writer, I think is very significant and is symbolic of that period.
My father was most proud of Strange Fruit, of all the things he ever did. He was most proud of that.
He was a very gentle man and a very humorous person who was really not comfortable in public. He was ill at ease, but he felt things very deeply and very passionately.
And he saw a photograph of a lynching, and it then inspired him to write the poem. Maybe it was all up here, but he said a picture inspired it.
Cafe Society's publicist hears Strange Fruit performed at one of the Theater Arts Committee cabarets. He subsequently arranges a meeting at Cafe Society between Barney Josephson, Abel Meeropol, and Billie Holiday. Meeropol plays the song for Holiday, and with encouragement from Josephson, she agrees to perform it. It is February 1939.
One of the amazing things to me about Meeropol writing Strange Fruit and getting it to Billie Holiday and then having it last the way it has as a song of racial protest is not that a Jewish person got a Jewish written song to a black performer, because that had been going on for decades at that point, but that the terms of that meeting were so different than they had ever been before.
There's this sense of the Jewish American being the middleman between the public, which has limited tolerance for blacks as a people, but kind of likes some of the cultural products of it, and the people and the culture and the music of black America, which kind of makes Strange Fruit really different. It's really different because what this Jewish American musician is being a middleman for is something quite militant.
There was a whole industry that we now call Tin Pan Alley, which was very much tied up with Jewish songwriters writing music, which lots of people heard as black music. Even if the performer was white, the songwriter was white, all the players on the song were white, and so on. There's a number of important Jewish composers of the era, Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, Harold Arlen, who made their real names by writing music that enough people identified as sounding black that it became sort of incorporated into the body of black music. That music stretches from Irving Berlin's Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1911, 1912, it becomes a big hit, up through Porgy and Bess in 1935, Gershwin's folk opera. The truly new thing about Strange Fruit, I think, is that those kinds of complicated dynamics have now given way to a new kind of complicated dynamics, which are much more about popular front politics, about finding ways to give voice to racial protest, to social opposition to the dominant order, which none of the songwriters previously had even touched on.
Through Strange Fruit, you see Billie Holiday actually making a step towards, you know, the kind of energy that you're sensing from a Jimi Hendrix or a lot of the music in the 70s. It's the first step away from entertainment and towards expressing something a little more harder edged, more true to the negative side of being black and living in America.
Strange Fruit immediately spread. The mark of a great song is its ability to be sung in slightly different ways by different people. Billie Holiday made it world famous, but many other people sang it. I sang it on occasion. I don't have any voice left at age 80. Southern trees have a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves, blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Great song.
In March 1940, Abel Meeropol is called before New York State's Rap-Couder Committee, which is investigating communism in the schools. He is asked whether the Communist Party commissioned him to write the song.
The Rap-Couder Committee would consider anything having to do with lynching or with any aspect of racism to be instigated by the communists, because that was part of the that went with the territory at that time. If you raised your voice against lynching or you raised your voice against discrimination, you were accused of being a communist. That didn't change for a number of years. It was true of Martin Luther King Jr., and it was true in the 60s as well, and it was true in the later periods.
Only 3 months after its release, Billie Holiday's recording of Strange Fruit reaches number 16 on the popular music charts. This is an unusually high ranking for a song which is banned by radio stations, who consider it too controversial. Meanwhile, other singers start to develop interest in Strange Fruit.
Bear
a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the roots.
I was a teenager. Josh White was the first African-American folk singer that I knew. And with that song, it was the first time that I had heard music and such grotesque destruction of life go together.
In 1950, Josh White is called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. In his testimony on communist infiltration in minority groups, he reads the lyrics of Strange Fruit into the congressional record. He is subsequently attacked from both flanks. The left accuses him of capitulating to the committee. The right disbelieves his avowed patriotism. His career never entirely recovers.
Is a strange and bitter cry.
Strange Fruit becomes Abel Meeropol's most famous composition. Yet he writes literally thousands of other poems, librettos, plays, scripts, and songs.
He had a studio, writing studio, which was a tremendous mess. Every time I'd walk in, he'd look up at me, look at the mess, and say, "I'm going to clean this up." And he said that for his entire life and never did.
In 1944, after 18 years of high school teaching, Meeropol leaves New York and moves to Hollywood to try his hand at writing for the screen. Then returns back east 6 years later, just ahead of the Hollywood Red Scare. During this period, he writes the lyrics to the song The House I Live In, a patriotic anthem on racial harmony, with music by Earl Robinson. In 1945, it is made into a film short starring Frank Sinatra.
The house I live in, a plot of earth, a street, the grocer and the butcher, and the people that I meet, the children in the playground.
He always said that he wrote it not because he was naive enough to think that it was the way America actually was, but it was the way America should be and could be based on its ideals.
The place I work in, the worker at my side.
What's fascinating about that is they leave out the verse. The house I live in, my neighbor's white and black. They leave that out. And my father was furious about that.
And the handshake, the air of feeling free, and the right to speak my mind out. That's America.
In fact, there's a story. My father and mother, Ann and Abel, when this film came on and when he saw that they'd left out the verse, he started screaming, "Shit! Shit! They've ruined my song!" They were thrown out of the theater.
That's America to me.
In 1946, shortly after the film wins an Academy Award, the idealism of The House I Live In is overshadowed by an incident near Monroe, Georgia, more reminiscent of Strange Fruit.
We're going down the road now toward the lynch site. I want you to think about that it's a hot summer day. You're going home. You're with your wife. You're with your friends. You're getting close to home now. You're coming this way. The road is probably a dirt road. All the windows in the car roll down, and there's a trail of dust behind. Then we round the curve, And what you're going to see ahead is going to be 25 to 50 unmasked men with rifles right here. And you know what's getting ready to happen. You know that the best you're going to come out with is a beating. And all of a sudden your joy and happiness now is stark terror. There's not a friendly face there.
On July 25th, 1946, 4 African Americans, George and May Mary Dorsey, Dorothy and Roger Malcolm, were killed by a lynch mob at the Moores Ford Bridge, 60 miles east of Atlanta. They were gunned down by a mob of white men, shot hundreds of times in broad daylight, and these killings were never prosecuted. Those responsible were never convicted. It was a national story back when it happened. President Truman was outraged by this incident, and it led to important changes.
The Moores Ford incident is the first lynching to draw nationwide attention in the years following the release of Strange Fruit.
The world found out, if they didn't already know, what was happening here in the South with all this lynching being going on. And it happened at a time, just so happened George Dorsey had served in World War II, and he got 3 letters of accommodation from the Army once he came out. And it was sad that he lived less than 10 months after he was discharged from the service back home. You know, he done made it alive all through the war, and then he come back home to be killed.
A year later, in 1947, Truman desegregates the military. Yet, as America settles into post-war prosperity, the Cold War begins, and anti-communism grows in strength.
The hatred, the use of hysteria to control, those kinds of things, in effect, the rule of the lynch mob is very similar to the kind of stuff that occurred as communists were demonized and marginalized out of the political process. Abel and Ann Meeropol are my parents. They technically are my adoptive parents because I didn't meet them till I was 10 years old.
My brother Michael and I were adopted by Abel and Ann Meeropol.
My original birth parents were Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. They were arrested in 1950 when I was 7. Needless to say, for a crime they didn't commit, supposedly stealing the secret of the atom bomb, but that's, you know, that's sort of a different issue.
Abel and Ann Meeropol volunteered to take us in after my parents' arrest. But we're told that as long as my parents were alive, we wouldn't be with people who my parents didn't know.
I spent 3 years with family and friends, and sometime in a shelter, in fact. And then they were executed in June of 1953. Right after that, the lawyer, Emanuel Block, who became our legal guardian by their wills, began searching for a home for us. And Abel and Ann were recommended to him.
After the execution, they came forward again. We were introduced to them at a Christmas party, Christmas Eve in 1953, at Du Bois's house. They drove us home that evening, and within a few weeks, we started living with them. Abel and Ann were progressive activists, members of the Communist Party in the 30s, though they never would admit that publicly to anybody, and probably if their ghosts were looking down on me today, they might even be mad at me for saying it. They had 2 children, one who was going to be named Louis and one who was going to be named Alan. But they were going to have 2 children, but they were stillborn. They had picked out the name, so they never were born alive. So that's where the name Lewis Allen came from.
The thing that I immediately was drawn to was he had the most unbelievable sense of humor.
He was always coming up with little ditties, making little jokes. He sort of had a real sense, a verbal sense of the absurd. We did fun things together. They had this old reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Now, folks, we will have Abel say a few words. Angwangwe, Kazalamazay, Lamazi, Lamazoi, Tishipati Wamaze, Orki, Porky, Angwangwe. Thank you, Abel. That was a very nice speech. This is station MEEROPOL. Brought to you by the hard-boiled egg dealers of New York City, Incorporated. And now we give you Michael Mirapol.
How did the funniest man I ever knew, Abel Mirapol, have such a dark consciousness to write a poem like Strange Fruit and then set it to music in such a haunting melody? My father was not only one of the funniest people, he was also one of the angriest people.
In 1956, Doubleday and Company publishes Billie Holiday's ghost-written autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. In it, Holiday implies that Mirapol wrote the lyrics to the song for her, and that the arrangement and music were done by her and Sonny White.
My father was just absolutely livid. He got a lawyer to get the publisher to agree to take it out of subsequent editions.
In dozens of letters between Mirapol, his lawyer, and Doubleday, the authorship of Strange Fruit is hotly contested. I wrote both the words and the music of Strange Fruit fully a year or more before Billie Holiday sang it, Mirapol insists. It was first sung by my wife, Ann Allen, at a performance of the Theater Arts Committee.
Southern trees bear strange fruit.
I admire Billie Holiday's rendition of the song tremendously, and Sonny White's wonderful interpretation, but I insist on the truth. I wrote Strange Fruit because I hate lynching, and I hate injustice, and I hate the people who perpetuate it.
Billie Holiday sang Strange Fruit during her tours in Europe at a time when other African American artists and intellectuals were agreeing to tone down their criticism of the United States. The McCarthy era, during that time, she kept singing that song.
And now a little tune written especially for me, Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rock, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter cry.
Less than a year after her 1958 appearance on BBC television, Billie Holiday dies at the age of 44.
Strange Fruit made a great difference in her life and in mine. If I hadn't heard her sing Strange Fruit, I wouldn't have known what social was.
During the 1960s, the civil rights movement assumes its own anthems. Strange Fruit is heard less frequently, but is not forgotten. Nina Simone and Carmen McRae released their own interpretations of the song.
In the 60s, there were many people who were singing protest songs. Strange Fruit helped in the movement for freedom and sanctity.
It's very easy to empathize with people who are oppressed. In some ways, that is the connection that was felt by so many Jews who got involved in the civil rights movement.
It was one of the songs that had well, an earlier existence in the 30s, and then an existence in terms of the civil rights movement in the States in the mid-60s. And then is revived again in the UK in the 70s as part of the Rock Against Racism movement. It wasn't just a sort of American phenomenon, it became part of an international phenomenon.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root.
In the 1980s, Abel Meeropol starts to suffer from Alzheimer's disease.
I would play Strange Fruit for him, and sometimes I'd sing it for him, but mostly I'd play the record for him.
I think it was just about the last thing he recognized.
He also used to absolutely love the fact that every once in a while he'd find himself in an anthology of Negro composers.
He dies in a Jewish nursing home near Springfield, Massachusetts in 1986 at the age of 83. Strange Fruit is performed at his funeral by Honey Kasoy, one of his school teacher colleagues. A decade after Abel Meeropol's death, renewed interest in Strange Fruit emerges. It is written about in books and scholarly articles, sampled in R&B music, rap songs, and spoken word poetry, performed in activist context, and studied in schools.
This, of course, was the song that was written by former teacher of DeWitt Clinton High School. He taught from 1928 to 1945. His name was Abel Meeropol.
You can see a hint of his dark humor in the title of the poem, Southern Trees Bear Strange Fruit. And it's like he's being funny in a dark way, so he's using his humor and his anger as one.
Usually trees are supposed to symbolize life, bearing fruit, and giving the whole concept of, the summery spring feeling, the whole concept of life, a new beginning of life. But why would he choose that to kind of depict death?
The blood on the leaves, you can directly see that you can directly see that whoever lynched this man has done it, but you don't see the person who actually told them to do it, who's usually not seen like the people who are like at the root, or the people behind the closed doors, who's usually like the high up officials.
Since the root was blood that was feeding the tree, I was thinking of hatred being fed, and what came out, the fruit, was the cause, the result of that hatred.
When they were talking about blood and leaves, that was like the current generation, and maybe Lewis Allen was saying that blood at the root, meaning that it's going to keep continuing because the leaves are going to die off the trees, and there might be one decade where, it may have been stopped for a little while, but then again, there'll be some more leaves that will continue to flourish, and that will continue to bring the racism and whatever types of social issues that were occurring at the time just keep going on throughout the generations.
In January 2000, Without Sanctuary, an exhibition of photographs of lynchings opens in a small gallery on Manhattan's Upper East Side. People wait in line for hours to see the show, which attracts such attention that it later moves to the larger halls of the New York Historical Society and eventually goes on national tour.
We haven't come to terms with lynching, and I think that's why there's this continued kind of interest and fascination, and also kind of just simple disbelief that this is what happened. As a nation, we haven't really come to terms with it. I think also we're fascinated with it because we know that it still exists. It doesn't exist in the way that it did. It doesn't exist with the kind of sanctioning of the state, because even though the state didn't legalize lynching, in some ways it sanctioned it by not making it illegal as a hate crime, for instance. So we don't have that anymore. We don't have a state sanctioning, but those attitudes that led to lynching still happen, and every once in a while we'll hear about a lynching. And the reason why we know what it is because it's very close to us. It's very close in our history.
Strange Fruit is still relevant because it still relates to a fundamental social dimension and structure in American society. The violent repression, whether it's done by a guy in a uniform in New York, 41 shots, or a toilet plunger up the butt, other way it's done by some maniac in Texas tying somebody to the back of a car. Both of those relate to Strange Fruit. Or this attempted lynching of Mumia Abu-Jamal, Strange Fruit again. The song will be absolutely at the center of deep, thoughtful, consideration of the United States and its history until that no longer exists.
We really have to understand how backward this country has been and how racism has degraded everything in it, and that it is not a black problem, it is a white problem.
You asked me earlier, how Jewish are you? And I said, until the last anti-Semite is dead, I'm Jewish. Until the last racist is dead, Strange Fruit is relevant.
The funny thing about lynching is that it's all based on projecting an identity, which then justifies anything from discrimination to complete brutality. There's that same kind of projection when a black person walks into a store and is followed around the store. It's symbolic of the current condition. We're just not necessarily stringing people up on trees.
People have tried to explain in words what the power of music is, and usually failed. All we know is that sometimes a short song, taking just a few minutes, can have as much impression on a listener as reading a whole novel can. A song is often a triumph of oversimplification. The novel can go into details. The song is more like a basketball backboard, and you bounce the experiences of your life against it, and it bounces back new meanings. So you can hear a good song many times and not tire of it. It's always slightly different in view of your own experience is slightly different. And sometimes singing a song can be an act of reaffirmation, like another sunrise, or another kiss. And you're just reaffirming, yes, this is something I believe in. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. No one had ever thought of that connection before, and Abel thought of it.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. Pastoral scene of the gallant South. The bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolia, so sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to dry. Here is a strange and bitter.
I didn't want to interrupt Cassandra Wilson's version. She's spectacular. I've seen this film now 3 times, and always end up shaking my head. It's really wonderful. Without taking too much time, in a moment, Rabbi Barry Marks from Temple Israel will give our benediction. And immediately after the benediction, we will go into social home family. What's the title? The Family Life Center, which is all set up for us to have some refreshments and time to talk, but also to discuss.
God of justice and compassion, you have fashioned all mankind in your image. You command us to love you with all our hearts, soul, and might, and love our neighbors as ourselves. Through your prophets, you have summoned us to pursue justice, to let righteousness well up as waters, and justice flow like a mighty stream. Alas, too often we have failed to live up to these ideals that are the essence of our faith traditions. In sorrow and regret, we acknowledge to you our lapses and transgressions. We have demeaned, humiliated, exploited, discriminated against those whom we deem other, whether because of the color of their skin, the country of their origin, or the creed they profess. The presentation we have viewed this afternoon reminds us of a sorrowful and tragic history, a history of violence and terror used to buttress an unjust social order. We have witnessed today how music can function as an instrument of protest when all decency demands that our voices be raised in outrage. God, we pray, cleanse our hearts of all that is unworthy. Sensitize us to injustice, endow us with the courage to speak up, to fight against hatred and bigotry, to be a force for justice, for harmony, for unity and understanding in our communities. Bless us with the light of your Spirit, for by your light do we see light. Amen.
Amen. As you make your way to the Family Life Center, folks, I'd ask you to please try to sit at the tables toward the front. You'll see what I mean when you get there. And it'll make your ability to hear and to involve yourselves with the discussion a lot easier. And now let's all go over to the Family Life Center. I'll meet you there.